There we are. We did it. Hey, everybody. We're back. This is the deity himself, my friend, the one, the only, the amazing, the inimitable Stéphane Nicoll. We're in paradise. We're in Barcelona. I've been telling everybody that's been on the show that it's a pity that it's such a good show. The conference we're in.
Yes.
It's a pity because if it were a mediocre show or even a crappy show, I would be outside.
So much to do.
Playing in Barcelona, but we're here and it's wonderful. You're here. I managed to catch you. I told you earlier, you're my favorite Pokemon, right? Like I've been trying to get you, and there's a couple. There's like 2 other people that are just like possible Pokemons. This is one of the 3. So I'm glad you're on the show. Thank you for joining me. I suspect the reason you agreed maybe is because finally 3.1 is behind us and you have an extra second of free time. And it's just been a busy 3 or 4 years for you. Like insane.
Oh yeah.
Oh. So you are doing 2 things. You're both a Spring Framework and a Spring Boot. You're like engine. Yeah. So we've had whole sea tide change in the capabilities in Spring Framework 6 and in Spring Boot 3.1, 3.0. As a result of that, right? And that's all because of the Spring Framework team, and the Spring Boot team just working extra hard, right? The last few years have been.
It's been tough, yeah.
Oh my God, like just incredible. And I know a lot of people. I talked about this with Dr. Fire and Andy Clement, of course, and the string of people who did 120%, right? Just nonstop for years to make all this stuff happen, and now it just lands so perfectly. One of the people that just did a ton was you, and I was just, you can see it. You can see the amazing quality of the code. You can see the author tags everywhere. The results are amazing. Just a big fan. It's just been hard. I know it's been hard, and I can't believe you're here. Oh, hello, team. Did I screw that up? I didn't mean to. Good to see you. I can hear myself. There. I'm streaming. There we go. I'm playing the video on the other side. Well, anyway, yeah. Thank you for joining me. So,
sure.
What did you talk about this trip, this conference?
Nothing.
You were in the BOF. You were just in the Spring Framework BOF.
That's the only one.
But you didn't do it. You don't have an actual talk?
No.
Oh, that's smart. Oh, so you came here for a R&D meeting or something like that. Okay. Smart.
First time. Actually, I almost missed it, but Sergey was kind enough to create a session like last minute, which was great, by the way. We had so many good questions. It was really a good time getting feedback from the community, and it was good.
Would you like the show, the Spring IO?
I mean, it's the best.
Yeah,
okay.
To me,
it's the best.
There we go. Just making sure. See, I always tell them, I'm like, you got to come, and like, no,
in terms of covering the Spring ecosystem and the members that are here, I mean, it's more difficult for our colleagues in the United States to join us.
Right.
But in terms of the members in this area in Europe, it's the best coverage that you could see.
Okay, I love the show. I'm glad you're here. Let's talk ever so briefly about you, because I know you're pressed for time. We got a little bit of time. Let's talk about you. You've been on the Spring team. Oh, the visa process takes up to 6 months. I really wanted to attend. 6 months. Okay, if you start now, you can be here next year. I'm sorry though, that is a pain. You're right. We're in Spain. Which place are you talking about? Is there the visa for Europe or a visa for the US? This is the Spanish show. Okay, just making sure. I don't know. Maybe they're both 6 months, but usually I think America's like
6 months for Europe.
That's
bad.
That would be very surprising. Morocco
to Spain.
Right there, you could see each other almost. Like it's just across the water.
Wow, 6 months. That's really a lot.
Well, yeah, okay. You are missed. I wish you were here. It's a great show. So, okay, let's talk about you ever so briefly. You joined the Spring team when?
10 years ago.
10 years ago, right? And I think I understood that. 2013. I remember you starting to appear here. You were already in the community for the thing I knew you from was all the Apache Maven stuff, right? Like, okay, so what's that story? How did you get into Maven? Like,
So I started actually with something called Xdoclet. Is that it?
Yeah.
Xdoclet.
But did you ever use EJB Doclet, or did you use only Xdoclet, which came after?
I think the first one, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember now. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so back then it was J2E, no Spring, AGBs, and all the things that we have to generate, and it's becoming crazy. So I'm trying to find tools to automate that. And so that's how I started with open source. Actually, the first thing I did was when I left left university, I did a 6 months R&D thingy,
right?
where I implemented some kind of tool to record presentations. So it's a thing where you record presentations.
Record, like,
so you have a proxy on your machine. You're showing slides, and then your voice is recorded and compressed with a JSM compressor.
Yeah.
And so you get the video and not the video, actually. The proxy is actually catching all the slides that you see.
Okay.
So you use a browser locally and pointing to the proxy, and it basically it catches everything that you display and the timeline. And then later on, it was, because that's the good part, you get an applet.
What?
Yes, you get an applet that actually display the recorded presentation.
It's amazing. Applets were pretty great. I liked WebStart even more, though.
So it was called eConf.
Okay. So when was this? 2005, 2001? Wow.
Don't look at the code. The code is still on SourceForge. Don't look at it, because I'm hugely embarrassed by it.
Oh, I wouldn't be. I think most people would be very happy to have even your poor code. You know. Okay. So that was your entry into Java. What about, how'd you get to Xdocket, which came after?
So I've joined a company called Kiala, which is now Mondial Relais, which has been acquired by UPS, I believe.
And that was you're in the French part of Belgium.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So I did that, and we were like working on that J2E. It was JBoss at the time, I believe.
Pretty good choice back then.
Yeah. And so that's how I started to do like open source contributions to Xdocket.
So for people who don't know, what is EJB Docklet, and then what was Xdocket, and why did we need it instead of just like going home?
Because there's so many useless stuff that you have to generate to make your AGB actually work.
One class with comments. We didn't have annotations back then. So we had an annotation processor. That's what it was. It was a Java doc processor,
right?
That looked at comments and derived all the remote interfaces, the local interface, the you know, whatever, the actual
and the deployment descriptor and all that.
Oh yeah, that was just for EJB, and it was a whole system around just making EJB less painful, hacking it onto language. Then we get annotations. A lot of that goes away.
Yes.
But before we got that, we had EJB Docklet and then Xdocket, which is like a generic commons
and
comments processor.
I can't remember, but we used Xdocket for a bunch of other things. Something related to database, I believe. I can't remember now. It's too
much pain.
Too much pain and too long ago.
Blocked it out.
And then Maven 1 was actually around.
I love Maven 1. Maven, not MVN.
And so I did. Funnily enough, I did implement the plugin for J2EE for Maven 1.
Wait, for what do you mean J2EE?
Like the WAR plugin, the EAR plugin.
You built those?
Yes.
God. Okay, I didn't know you had that much depth in the Maven project. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I used it. You know.
Okay, cool.
And by the way, I used EJB Docklet and Xdocket from Ant. Like it took a few years for me to get to Maven.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah. Anyway, WAR. So you were at the WAR and the EAR plugin.
Yes.
For Maven 1. Is that code, does that survive into 2? Because it was a big refactoring.
It was completely rewritten. And so I joined the PMC in 2005, I think. 2004. And worked on Maven 2 quite heavily on the WAR plugin and the EAR plugin as well. Back to
so the WAR plugin.
Yes.
You worked on the WAR plugin for Maven 2 then?
Yes.
That means that in theory, up until a few years ago, it might be true that you were working on something that was used more often than even Spring. I thought, I mean, I know you've already climbed to great heights, but it was to think you already impacted more people's lives before even joining the Spring team. That's pretty amazing. Well done. Good job. Good stuff in a great way too. Obviously, I've used that plugin. I'm sure everyone has. You know,
I mean,
you
have to.
Anybody who's older than Spring Boot, the only way to go to production.
Hopefully, we don't have to do that anymore.
Right. Okay, go on.
So jump back to.
That's true. That's true. Right there. That's a fact. Stefan made DevX easy for us. Absolutely.
Thank you, and thank you very much.
And he says no EJBs, which I agree.
No AJBs, yes. Okay. So I joined the Spring team like 10 years ago. I was still a member of the PMC of Apache Maven. But of course, I had no time anymore to contribute. After a few years, I decided to retire from the project. I didn't want to take a seat that someone else with more time could use. But I'm still around. I'm still checking.
Sure.
I have friends, of course, because it's like more than my time on Spring actually. Working on Maven. So how do I get to the Spring team? It's like I was a contributor to Spring Batch.
You were? Oh, that's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So we had a framework built on top of, we had rebuilt pretty much everything. So we had our own persistence layer. Our batch was workflow framework. It was like a framework that was like started pretty much at the same time as Spring, maybe a bit older. And so my role on that team was to lead the framework team, which is a private framework. And obviously, when we looked at Spring back then, it was becoming obvious that we had to move to something else. So one of the first things that we did was ditching our batch framework.
It's because you're smart. That's why this is obvious. There's a lot of people who are like, I can do it better myself. Even today, I'm like,
maybe not. No. It's not. I mean, to your point, it's not really not only about the developers working on it, but the community. It's the community that really brings the power to this, getting feedback to us, telling us we're wrong, and telling us, sharing ideas to improve. That's really key to Spring success, I think.
Tens of millions of hours of R&D. Even if you're the best programmer ever, you're not going to be able to outdo whatever, tens or hundreds of millions of hours, over the last 20 years. Anyway, go
on. So one thing that Spring Batch at the time did not support was distributed clustering of distributed partition,
remote partitioning and chunking.
Yes, remote partition and chunking. So we actually contributed that. So we
contributed that. Oh wow.
So we implemented basically what we had on top of Spring Batch, the Spring Batch API, and that was my first pull request on GitHub actually.
Oh wow.
So if you look around, so I started to talk to Dave and Mark Fisher at the time at the Spring conference, 2012 maybe. Then I got like a way to get an interview. I was not selected. It was for the Spring Batch lead role that Michael Minella had.
Oh, well, okay, but they never. It's not like you weren't selected. You were just not selected for that one thing. You were definitely in a hat of
top
I mean,
line, I don't know how it ended up. And then Brian Dussault, like 9 months later, reached out to me and asked me to do another interview.
Sure.
For Spring Framework this time. That's how I joined.
Oh, that's so good. We're so lucky. I mean, you poor bastard. You've had a tough time, but we, the people that got to work with you, we're very lucky. So then, okay, so that was Spring Framework. This is 10 years ago. So this is Spring Framework 3X-ish and going into 4, right?
Yes. So I joined while 4 was being almost released. Yes.
Yeah, that was where we introduced the conditions and huge refactorings to Spring to support what would become Spring Boot.
Yes.
Just a couple of years later, a year later.
A year later, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you were on Spring Framework working on. Did you dive right in and start doing all the crazy stuff to make conditions happen, or
no? I started with like the cache abstraction.
That's right, cache manager and
so we already had a very nice API in 3.2. I can't remember now what I did, but there were like a number of requests from the community, and I don't remember what I did.
Yeah.
But essentially improving what we already had. Maybe adding more providers to it.
And you also did the event listener.
And
the messaging.
And the messaging abstraction. Yes, that was the first year. And it's funny because I was talking to Jürgen and I was a bit stressed my first Spring 1 I wanted to. I'm always trying to co-speak with someone, because then I'm typing and the other person is saying the smart things, and that works quite well. So Jürgen, I told Jürgen, hey, you want to join me for a talk? And we're like, okay, but I have worked on this caching thing and this messaging thing. So what do we do? And Jürgen was like, okay, caching and messaging improvements in Spring 4 or Spring 4.1. I can't remember now, which were totally unrelated. And that was my first talk with him.
Amazing. And I love that he's so generous. Next time, if you want, maybe you could do the smart talking, I could do the typing.
Okay.
I like it when you talk and I type. Okay. It's really good that way. People learn things. And also I don't do much work. Okay. So that was, and then how did you eventually start moving? I mean, like the auto config for the cache manager stuff that came a little bit later.
Much later, actually.
Yeah. So like, what was your natural path into Spring Boot, which is new at the time?
So I had, as part of my onboarding with the team, I had I was very fortunate to spend a week with Phil Webb in San Francisco.
Spring Boot co-founder and lead right now. Yeah.
So it was in March. So it was like 3 months after I joined the team. And the idea was Phil was working also on the Spring Framework team at the time.
Was this when you and I hung out in Los Angeles?
No.
Different time. Okay.
Oh, it was much later.
Okay. Yeah.
And as part of my onboarding, like spending some time with someone, and it was my first time in San Francisco, so I have a very fond memory of that week. It was great. And Phil essentially showed me around, like the kind of, the design decisions that we make, how we process with Git and GitHub and whatnot. So it was great. And so on my way in, I actually had the reference guide of Spring Boot on my iPad.
Wow.
Was it the iPad? I can't, maybe.
Sure, yeah.
Can't remember.
It came out in 2011, so you could have.
Yeah, I couldn't have one. Okay. And I spent the whole flight reading the documentation and finding things that could be improved, or like typos and stuff like that, trying, to be like a first review, essentially. So I sent this email to Phil with like, I don't know how many bullet points. Retrospectively, I should have fixed the code myself, but at the time I wasn't sure what to do. And then I started to send a few pull requests, and at some point Dave was like, because you know how Dave is like very pragmatic guy.
Yeah.
Things are very organic with him.
Dr. Sire, the co-founder of Spring Boot and co-founder of Spring Cloud.
And we were like chatting about, can't remember what, and then I asked him how he wanted me to contribute this, and he said, oh, you have push rights now, you're part of the team anyway.
Yeah.
And just like that. So I don't know if Dave and Phil discussed it beforehand, or if like Dave dropped the ball and said, okay, you're part of the team, and without asking anyone. But
so you didn't even know you had joined the Spring Boot team?
No.
Okay.
But things on the Spring team are very organic. We just like talk to each other. We try to find the best outcome, and things happen just as they're supposed to be.
Absolutely, I agree. It's amazing. Okay, so there's, I mean, again, we're still talking about 2014, 2013. That still close to a decade ago. There has been a lot recently in the last 9+ years, but I want to fast forward to recent memory. The single biggest release in my mind, maybe in the history of Spring, is 3.0, because it set up a whole new foundational programming model. It set up things that were optimized for the future, and already it brought the future here. I just huge fan. It was also one of the hardest releases, because it took there's multiple years of R&D on like, forget about the AOT stuff for a second, the GraalVM. Just the Jakarta EE integration was a pain, right? Oh, by the way, the Maven thing, I forgot to ask. So today, 2023, Maven or Gradle? It's okay to say both, but I won't love the answer.
It depends. I mean, if I were to start, I would say Gradle, and that's the reason why we flipped the switch on start of Spring.io. We felt that it was the right thing to do. for newcomers, like if you're starting your career or if you're at the university or basically getting started with like programming, we felt it was more responsible to route users to Gradle.
Okay.
But there is a huge Maven base, and Maven is really a good tool. I mean, I've been working on it for so many years, so I really like it. It has like a huge fan base, a huge like Stack Overflow list of questions and answers, and
a lot of great functionality.
Yes,
but I will agree. I started this year. I just said I'm going to just do Gradle this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did one Maven project just because it was related to Maven, right?
Mm.
But basically, for like the 80% stuff, yeah, Gradle's going to be. It's fine. It works fine. It's great. It's easier, and also, I think I've written maybe 2 Maven plugins in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But with Gradle, it's so easy to create a little task. Anytime you need to dig into it, it's just like, oh, build source and just have at it. You're good within a second, you know. Anyway, okay, I'm with you. It depends, but Gradle's great. Okay, moving on. So Spring Boot 3.0. What was so there was this? I mean, I don't think people understand. There's this whole thing. We did the Spring Native thing, right? That was like an R&D Skunksworks project.
Mm-hmm.
Started what 2018, and then we announced it maybe late 2019, I think,
Yes.
and then
Mm-hmm.
2020 we had that first few. Like March of 2020, I remember doing a very early Spring Tips video on that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it took me 10 minutes to build a JPA web app on my machine because GraalVM would improve a lot, and then Spring's integration with GraalVM would improve a lot. So the very first build, those very early days, you know, not what it could have been.
Yes.
What was that story like for you? Like, when did you jump in and effectively take over the reins leading up to 3.0?
So Spring Native like tried a number of experiments to make it easier for GraalVM to process the application. As you said, the problem really at the beginning was that there were like no optimizations whatsoever in the way the application context creates your beans and decide what to inject and when.
Right.
So essentially, GraalVM had to go through everything, every possible option that the context might take, which bring a lot of code, a lot of like reflection needs, and essentially things that you actually don't use,
right,
because there was no way to know at that time that you're not going to use it. So that's why it was very slow, except some improvements in GraalVM in recent releases.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, Sebastian and Andy, when they started the project, they've tried various approaches and really trying to make it work. And at some point, it became to a point where it wasn't really how the Spring team deal with things anymore. It was like a lot of assumptions. Like, I know, for instance, that if you use that feature, it's going to do this and that, and
right,
it was hard-coded somewhere in Spring Native. So it was not like the logic was duplicated, if you
right,
will. I remember that something called import selector, which is a way for you to add beans programmatically, they were not supported. So essentially, every feature in the Spring portfolio that used that,
enable,
yeah, exactly, that used import selector wasn't working unless Spring Native had some kind of hard-coded thing to make it work.
Oh dear, yeah.
So I mean, we didn't want to go outside of experimental with that. Obviously, nobody did. And so I had experimented with this idea of actually running the exact same code as when your application starts, but providing a hook point in the application context to stop right before it creates the beans.
I see. Yeah.
So what that means is that import selector would run, everything that's programmatic would run, annotation processing would run. And so you have like a list of bean definitions that you are about to create as beans, and you stop there and you look at the bean factory, then you try to replicate the state of the bean factory.
Is there any reason? So do we have to do anything to the bean definition meta model to give us the rich information we would need to then reify to write out the exact same state again, or was it already rich enough?
It was rich enough. So Ash, I must say, now you give me the opportunity. The foundation of the core container it is amazing. Yeah. It is honestly amazing. What they've built, what Jürgen and team has built in the initial, let's say, incantation of the framework. There wasn't really a lot to do, to be honest. It was like discovering how to do it properly and at the right place in the code.
Right.
But the separation between the parsing and the definition and the actual instances, were, from an architectural standpoint, were clearly separated already.
So that's a good point. So people, like, you have configuration classes, component scanning, XML. Please don't use XML. We have, functional config, all these things put in. There are ways to describe objects, then they get turned into bean definitions.
Yes.
And then normalized. So at that point, we lose. I mean, we have annotations that tell us that was from this or that, but basically we don't care.
Yep.
It's just bean definitions, and then from there, in a JVM app, we turn it into a actual object, right? But you're saying we stopped in the
we stopped there, and we look at the model of the bean definition, and then we create it back as generated code, essentially.
And you're able to capture all of that. That was really cool.
So that's really the bit that took a long time. If you look at the Spring portfolio and Spring modules, like Spring Integration, Spring Batch, Spring Session, Spring Security, they all have their ways of using the application context.
Spring Data, which is amazing. Rich use.
So it was interesting in both ways, because we got a chance to actually see that some of the portfolio were using the context in a way that we didn't really know about, which isn't bad in any way, but it's like, oh, okay, that doesn't work because you're using this way, and we're not supporting that yet.
Because you're capturing it after that thing would have run, or before,
or they're for instance, they're using some attribute of the bean definition that we don't support or we don't want to support. Things like that.
So did we eventually have to help other projects either tweak the way they did things, or do we instead change the Spring?
Both. So something that
I
think one of the main reasons for success of 3.0 is that we got the feedback from the whole Spring team, like the 60 engineers that are working, 60 plus engineers working on the project, telling us, oh, AOT doesn't work for me because of that.
A, B, and C.
And then you improve the engine, and what you see is that someone else tells you the next day, oh, that doesn't work because of that, and I say, oh yeah, I fixed it yesterday. You need to get the snapshot.
I remember, and it affected every project. So every project was feeding back on this. It's not often that you get a thing where everybody needs to be on board, right?
Yes. So congrats to the team.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Okay, the result is now you have transformations that happen. We've got to mention the other part. One is you inspect the bean definitions, and then Spring writes out this reified. It writes out code, and also you can contribute JSON configuration for
for native images. Yeah.
But all that, so that's part one. Is Spring is doing that, but part two is regular users can do that. Anybody can do that. It's the same mechanism, right?
Yes.
And to me, that's super interesting. That part, and even to this, see, look right here. We have a. I like the idea of Spring Boot to generate full Java code, bean definitions with Java Poet, right? People are fans. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities here. I asked you about this earlier, but I'm a big fan. I love this result, right? What people don't know is if you spend more than 10 minutes in the AOT engine, you eventually realize you can write your own code. You can use an API to write out your own code.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are going to need to. I think like 1%, no, less than 1%, like 0.01%. But you can.
you can, and as everything Spring, really, we like to expose the API that we use ourselves, so that anybody that's building a library on top of ours can do the same thing as we did. It's a bit like configuration properties in Boot when we initiated the metadata and you have auto completion of properties. Initially, user was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" And can you please do something so that I can create my own properties? We were like, "You can do it now. That's how it's designed. You can do it." And it took a while. We got a lot of questions of people asking us, "How do I get that?" It was a Stack Overflow question that had a lot of traction back then. And so for AOT, it's the same thing. If you have a library, you have a system annotation that does some processing at build time, you can very easily implement an extra interface. You get a callback when AOT runs, and you have a chance to do whatever.
And there's actually two, I mean, there's some like component level stuff that feels like it it's just if you have a common use case of like reflection, you can use register for reflection binding. If you just want to like register hints and you don't care about the bean factory at all, you've got runtime hints registrar. But if you want to like get into, if you want to inspect the bean factory and look at all the bean definitions, you've got bean definition registry and AOT processor, and you've got
bean factory AOT processor or something
bean factory
like
initialization AOT processor,
something like that.
So the bean factory one gives you the whole bean factory. The other one gives you each individual bean, the registered beans.
Yes.
Like, is there like guidance on when to use what?
So the bean factory one, I would use it if you.
Absolutely.
Very nice.
Very true nice. And very nice.
Very nice. So if you need to inspect beans having a certain annotation, for instance.
Yeah.
So you want to collect all the beans that have a certain annotation on them. Then you would use the bean factory because that's the natural place to do it.
Yeah. But make sure to avoid calling get bean on anything.
Oh yeah, because if you do that, things will go wrong for sure.
Yeah.
Then the other one is if you're more like in a post-processing type, or if you're interested by a particular bean, rather than implementing the bean factory and then asking, is that bean around? It's better to implement the other interface and just get a callback when that bean is actually there.
Right.
So that you don't have to do the querying and whatnot.
Could we provide a wrapper around the configurable bean factory that gets passed in? That just whenever you call get bean, it throws an exception if it's in compile time.
It's one of the things. Yeah, I paused when you said get bean. I was like, oh, that's the thing I meant to do, and I forgot.
Oh,
yeah. So
okay, well,
we'll have to do something like that. Yes.
No big deal. I mean, again, I think it's unfortunately a very niche feature at the moment because people just don't realize. First of all, you can do GraalVM native images, and second of all, you could do compile time. It's not just for GraalVM. It's AOT. It's all compile time engine, right? This opens up a whole new world, including the transformations into functional, removing lots of reflection. By the way, are there like it's for functional bean registration? We still do some reflection if you're using @autowired on a field. Is there a way to avoid that? Like, I mean, don't do that, please. But if you are,
I mean, if the field is private, there is not much that you can do.
Yeah.
And you have to use reflection.
Right. Exactly.
If you have a way to access it via a method or anything, then we will call the method if we can.
Yeah.
And if we can't call the method because we don't have the rights, then reflection is the route.
And you register the hints for the reflect config as well.
Yes.
So cool.
So this is what's nice about it. It's like small pieces of building the engine essentially, where you look at things in isolation. Okay, I'm going to do that, so I need to register a hint so that it works in a native image. And because it's separated and it's like focused on one thing only,
right?
It's easy to it's easy to implement, and it's easy to maintain, rather than having this big soup of things that you have to do and everything is in one place.
Right. Okay, I love it. So we have some great questions here. First of all, this one I can answer because it's easy. Is there a way to build native images for Spring apps from a Docker container without having GraalVM locally? Yes. It's already there. It's build tools, build packs, Maven, Spring -boot : build -image, and then you pass in -p native, or does that just work?
You pass -p native if you're on Maven.
Yeah.
If you're on Gradle, you don't have to.
Yeah, and then Gradle, you just do build boot image, and if you've got the GraalVM stuff on the in the build file, it'll automatically do that. So it'll compile the code in the Docker image, which is Linux. It'll create a Linux binary inside the Linux container, and then when you do Docker tag and Docker push and Docker run and whatever, you're starting up the native image, not the JVM code, which is already cool. It's already been there
since the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, the beginning. It's not that old, but yes.
Yeah, even Spring Native had a version of that, right?
Yes.
It's been there for a while. Great question. Great question. I don't think people know enough about our Docker support. This is a great question. How much of an performance improvement can we expect when AOT generated code runs in JVM mode? So this is important.
Yeah.
AOT mode.
So this is something that we haven't really investigated yet due to a lack of time, but there is a strong interest.
Those 8 hours at night you don't need.
I know. There's a huge interest for Spring Framework 6.1. Jürgen actually announced today at the at the conference that was one of the theme in 6.1. There's also a tweet from Sébastien Deleuze, if you're interested, that actually tries to answer that question. And essentially, if you have like a super fast machine, plenty of CPUs, and plenty of resources, you might not see, that's the one, yes, you might not see really a difference. But if you're working in a constrained environment, in a cloud environment with maybe one CPU and less memory, then you start seeing some massive improvements. And the plan is to build on that and continue to some build processing essentially. So we had a buff like an hour ago, and I was talking about thinking maybe to post-process the controller annotations.
Yeah.
So looking at all your controllers, and rather than doing the expensive processory of scanning them, looking at the request mapping, building the router, the internal router, essentially, it's like doing it at build time and then generating the code that represents the router.
Like using router functions and stuff?
Maybe.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
that would essentially transform your declarative way into a functional way, and you could see exactly what's going to be hit and why. And obviously, you're not going to do the expensive work of, expensive, depends of your constrained environment. It is fast, but it could be faster, obviously.
Of course. But I mean, it's nice that we have the engine in place to support these now little slices of.
Yeah. So initially, just to share a bit of a backstory, initially that was the plan for 6.0, to actually work on that,
right,
and write the router out of the annotation model. But I mean,
time. I get it.
We need to sleep essentially. Yeah.
So good question. Is there any possibility that Spring Boot could have live reload faster? And I think we have the dev tools. I did it yesterday. It's like 0.2 seconds, whatever, for a normal app, with data access and a web tier and actuator and all that stuff. It's fast. Dev tools, and especially with test containers and that new support for,
Yep.
It's really fast. I don't know how much faster we can make it, but it's fast enough that by the time I get to the browser, it's already there. Right? Yeah. Okay. Goodness. What is this? Kudos to the metadata reachability contributors. Yes. Well,
absolutely.
I want to just, the Spring team did a lot of that. We did a lot of that. It was one of the things that we contributed, because a lot of the stuff from Spring Native, those very delicate sort of configurations that we figured out,
right.
A lot of that ended up in the reachability repository. We were the first framework to enable that support out of the box. When you build a native image, it resolves it from the libraries and meta-inf, and now also from that. And so that's great. So 3.1. We just talked about the AOT stuff. I'm a huge fan. Like I said, can't wait to see what you work on there, and the more stuff that's coming. 3.1 just that horse has just left the stable yesterday late at night. We were asleep, but maybe I was asleep. I was very happily asleep.
I wasn't asleep actually.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say yeah. I was dreaming of Spring Boot 3.1. I knew it was gonna come, and it did. It came on the 18th of May, just not in Europe. And it was further western. Okay, so 3.1 test containers, Docker Compose, great dev experience, live, reset cycle time experience. What's 3.2?
Well, that's a good question. 3.2 is about picking up the next feature release of Spring Framework 6.1, where after Loom, after Checkpoint Restore. So we still need to figure out what we're going to do there, because there's a number of things that need fixing, especially for Checkpoint Restore. We're not there yet. There are a number of oh, you're looking at me. Interesting, with a bit of a delay. There's someone who's actually filming us. Okay.
Odin walked by and took a photo.
Okay, nice.
Okay.
So yeah, Tomcat has some stuff to do there. There is also the discussing about the next Jakarta EE, because it will require Java 21.
Oh yeah, do we have an answer on that? Are we gonna
So the plan, as far as I remember, the plan is that the Tomcat may actually backport pretty much everything in the current version.
Okay.
Although it's a decision up to the team, but it looks like that's what they want to do.
Okay.
We might, including Loom, obviously. So we might get the support for Loom with the current generation.
You mean Java 17?
Yes.
So what about?
No, Java. You need to bump to 21, but you don't need to bump to the new Jakarta EE version. You keep the current version essentially.
Okay. So that's the question right here. Actually, is will Spring Framework 6.1 and Spring Boot 3.2 baseline in Java 21?
No.
Which is amazing. Now, will that support extend? Do we know for example, Jetty or
Right.
Undertow?
Yes.
We don't know yet.
We don't know yet.
Okay.
So that's why it's still very up in the air. What we do in the 6.1 build is we've initiated multi-release jars.
Yeah.
So we do have for Loom support. It's already in. If you want to have a look, we already have like support for Loom in dedicated section of the build that needs Java 21 to compile, obviously.
Right.
But we use multi-release jars so that you can still use it with 17 if you want.
Amazing. My friend, I kept you for like 15 minutes longer than I said I would.
That's fine.
This has been amazing. I love working with you and watching you do your amazing things. I know you put in 120% in everything you do, and it shows in the results. The community, you can see that people are excited. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you everybody for joining.